Let's get to the man that I have been waiting to talk to all night, Terry McCrann, who's an excellent business columnist and speaks such common sense in the Herald Sun and with us so regularly here at Sky News. And he's all to my lonesome right now to have a chat. And he's joining us now from Melbourne. Great man. Chris Richardson, who often gets 5 trillion column inches around this time of the year. He's an economist with Access Economics. He says that if there's a $6 billion increase in government spending, then that normally ends up resulting in the RBA thinking about inflation. There's a lot more than $6 billion that's going to be spent here. Does this budget defeat the inflation dragon or give it extra things to burn?
Paul, I've got to start by saying, Joe, keep taking those pills, and now you can take twice as many. Before I answer your question directly, Paul, let me say I've done this Dr. Jim's amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat Kool-Aid surplus.
Yes.
I mean, it tells you there's something dodgy about the whole process when we've got big deficit, suddenly a surplus, then back to big deficit, as far as the eye can see to the future. That's got to tell you there's something a little dodgy about how the surplus has been arrived at. And as you've identified, it's this massive increase in spending on revenue on the one side, all thanks to the resources boom, all thanks to that income tax surge. But the spending doesn't cut in until July 1. The new spending, that's in the next financial year. So they've shifted all the spending into 2023, 2024, and all of the years after that. So we've got those surpluses all the way into the 2030s. And let's remember, Paul, these again are Treasury forecasts about the future. Now, I say two things. They're Treasury forecasts. We know how dodgy they always turn out to be. They pretend to think they can actually forecast what's going to happen even 6 months into the future. We're supposed to believe we can take as gospel what they're saying 6 years into the future, and they are about the future. So, we get ambushed by recessions, we get ambushed by COVID, we get ambushed by all sorts of crazy things happening in the world. So on the back of all that, when you come back to what does this do for inflation, well, I think I will give this budget a little bit of a tick by having those measures which directly reduce recorded inflation by 0.75%.
Yes.
Now, it's a trick, but it's a trick that I think works in the short term. Whether in fact, so I don't think the Reserve Bank is going to react to this immediately by saying we've got to go back to waking up interest rates or we've got to continue to wake up interest rates. I think they're probably going to have to do that anyway, quite irrespective of what's in this budget.
Yeah, good to point out to people that inflation, there's a basket of goods which is used to determine whether inflation goes up, things like housing, things like electricity. Is tobacco one of the things that is in the basket of goods, because they are increasing taxes there and inflation has gone wildly high based on that? Tobacco's in the goods or not?
Yes, it is, but only a tiny bit. I mean, we don't smoke as much as we used to.
There's only 10% of people smoke.
We can't afford to smoke. We can't afford to smoke as much as we used to. The poor buggers that still have to smoke are paying ridiculous prices. But yes, I mean, but the overall impact is to deliver a one-off cut in inflation. Yes, Jane Hume is right. There's no sustainable reduction in inflation. But I think that one-off cut is useful because they want to try and convince unions not to go chasing 5, 6, 7% wage increases. They want to keep those wage increases below 4%. So I think that thing is a small plus in the budget. But the bottom line, Paul, is that we're building in so much more spending going forward. And at the moment, we're getting that revenue harvest from the resources boom. We're getting it from selling all our coal, our iron ore and gas to people overseas. You can't use the coal and gas in Australia, but we'll happily sell it to the Chinese, the Indians, even the Europeans, and the government takes that revenue in and then hands it back to compensate, some of it, to compensate people for paying those higher gas and electricity bills. I mean, it's a crazy round robin, and we're just going to get more and more down deeply enmeshed in it as we go through the rest of the 2020s.
Yeah, I can ask my team in the control room to bring back the graphic, which is total government expenses, which again shows to Terry's point that this year they're going to spend $684 billion, next year $715 billion, then 743 billion, then 771 billion. And even though their income goes up because of the number of people who are pay-as-you-go taxpayers, bracket creep and all the rest of it, they still get swamped by deficit, and then all that talk about the debt, $1 trillion and nothing to show for it. Their debt goes from having a 5 in front of it to almost $750 billion in 5 years.
Well, exactly, and then you've got to put in the projections beyond that point. Remember, again, these projections are assuming the sun keeps shining. We continue to get that harvest from our export income. We don't have a recession in the economy. The economy keeps ticking over. We've got migrants coming in. They pay income tax. We have all that. Even into the 2030s, we've still got large budget deficits projected. In 2033-34, there's still a huge budget deficit, almost as big as the ones we're seeing in those next 4 years. And all that's adding to the debt. And that's still, after all that huge revenue surge, lots of bracket creep, more people in the workforce, and all those dollars coming in from our exports. Yes. So, this is not a budget you'd want to actually inherit in 1, 2 or 3 years' time when you start to see things starting to go wrong.
Yeah, I get the feeling that this is a treasurer who's won lotto and he's decided to spend it on 2 jet skis rather than 1 because at least he can bring a mate along for the ride. Well,
he hasn't just won lotto, Paul. He's rigged lotto to deliver him that win, that one-off win, that $4 billion surplus in the current year. He knows that the year's over. He can mark that on his resume. I gave Australia a surplus. Maybe I'll never give it another surplus. Let me predict tonight, Jim Chalmers will never deliver another surplus even if he remains treasurer as long as Peter Costello. And he's actually admitted that in the budget.
It's extraordinary. Now, also power prices here. Look, I'd say this is a wonderful fiddle. It's a one-off. It's an attempt to pretend, we're meeting you on cost of living issues, despite the fact, as I pointed out, power prices have gone up in the past 12 months. They go up even further in the next 12 months. But here's in part what he had to say about keeping people warm in winter.
And a big part of making sure that energy bills are more affordable into the future is improving the energy efficiency of Australian homes, and not just new builds. Through this budget, we are investing $1 billion to help provide low-cost loans for double glazing and solar panels and other improvements that will make homes easier and cheaper to keep cool in summer and warm in winter.
Is this Pink Bats 2.0, but it's less controversial because there'll be a middleman?
I was thinking exactly that as you listen to his words, Paul. Yes, it is. It's a combination of Pink Bats 2.0, hopefully without the fatalities that we had,
100%,
and school halls. All those school halls that were built at extraordinary prices. But when you look at the sort of structure of the budget, it sort of falls into 2 categories. Those measures to hand out money to worthy people, recipients. The Medicare, the job seeker, all those things. And on the other side of the budget, there's the huge spending that's going to take place in the so-called transition to renewable energy. The sort of the double glazing that you just mentioned, promoting hydrogen, pouring money into transmission lines, all that. So again, you've got this huge spending which is locked in forever. But which is not going to deliver at the end of that cheaper electricity prices or cheaper gas prices, because we're driving out the production sources, the coal and the gas, which actually deliver the real energy cheaply. So it's this crazy, these crazy sort of round robins where money's going around in circles, and at the end of all that, we've still got huge deficits, and actual consumers out there, people who are watching this program, are not going to end up with cheaper energy, cheaper anything.
Well, and even when, again, as I've said a couple of times tonight, because I know people are sort of coming in and out, and there's a lot of hate watching of us in Canberra. When you have a look at the ABS average Australian is a woman 30 to 35. She's married, 2 kids, household income $156,000. According to all of those little calculators everyone has on their websites about what's in it for you, if the kids are in childcare, okay, a couple of $1,000s. If it's not, well, Nothing this year, $1,500 next year, but you had $1,500 last year, which means, again, typical sort of Labor playing towards the people who already vote for them. But last one here, as a person who's seen way too many of these things and seen all the BS, including a lot of the media that just flood people with figures and narrative and politics and all the rest of it, give it to us straight. What does everyone always get wrong when they look or report or discuss a federal budget?
Well, the central thing, I think, Paul, is that they take the figures as gospel. They take the figures as these numbers will flow, and we get 6 months down the track and they've all been thrown in the bin, and we start again with a whole set of new numbers. You see it in this actual budget. The numbers that were there from October, that's not many months ago, all have been thrown in the bin, including the fact this was going to be a deficit this year. Now it's a surplus. A big deficit, now it's a surplus. So you cannot, and the expectations that the money that's handed out to people, all those things are worthy, and the people that are getting it are deserving. The typical middle person right in the middle is not, as you've articulated. And yes, you can argue that it's best that the money is directed to people at the bottom end of the scale. Yes, I get that, and I don't object to it. But at the same time, it's got to come from somewhere, and where it's coming from is those middle income earners, is those high income earners, and bracket creep, it impacts on everybody. Stealing money out of your pocket, which is not a tax increase legislated, but it is a very real tax increase.
By the way, when you talk about Treasury getting it wrong, this was their income projections. Frydenberg's budget, $507 billion. October budget, $547 billion. Tonight, $635. That's all for one financial year. 3 guesstimates from Treasury, and they missed it by that much. Thank you, Terry. Lovely to see you. Looking forward to talking to you soon. And, of course, keep reading it away there.